Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we travel back in time, back to the deep winter of 1959.
Find a comfortable position.
Allow your body to grow heavy.
And let your mind drift with my voice.
There is nothing for you to do, nowhere for you to be, except here, listening to a quiet story from the past.
Our story takes place beneath the vast, cold skies of the Ural Mountains,
a formidable spine of rock and forest that separates Europe from Asia.
It was here that a group of 9 young friends, students and engineers, embarked on an ambitious skiing expedition. They were skilled, they were prepared, and they were filled with that quiet confidence that comes from youth and shared experience.
Their journey was a celebration of endurance and the stark beauty of the winter wilderness.
But their journey would not end as planned. It would conclude in silence, leaving behind a mystery that has been softly debated for decades. The Dyatlov Pass incident, as it came to be known, is a story of footprints in the snow and of unanswered questions. Tonight, we will not seek to solve this mystery. We will not dwell on the sensational or the dramatic. Instead, we will simply retrace their steps. We will feel the rhythm of their skis on the snow. We will imagine the quiet camaraderie of their evenings. And we will settle into the deep, profound stillness of the vast frozen landscape that surrounded them.
Let the story unfold gently.
A quiet murmur to accompany your rest. Our story begins not in the wilderness, but in the heart of the Soviet Union in the late 1950s. Imagine the city of Sverdlovsk, now called Yekaterinburg, a sprawling industrial center, alive with the hum of factories and the determined energy of a nation rebuilding. In this era, physical fitness was woven into the fabric of society. It was seen as a wholesome, productive pursuit, and youth organizations, supported by the state, encouraged pursuits like hiking, climbing, and skiing. It was in this environment that a young engineering student named Ural Dyatlov gathered a team for a challenging winter trek. The group was composed of his peers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, 8 men and 2 women, all in their early 20s. They were not daredevils.
They were methodical and experienced. They had spent long hours together training, studying maps, and preparing for the harsh conditions of a Grade 3 expedition, the highest and most difficult classification for a sporting trek in the Soviet Union. Their route was carefully planned to coincide with the 21st Congress of the Communist Party, a detail that lent their personal adventure a sense of official purpose. By late January of 1959, their preparations were complete. On the 25th of the month, the group boarded a train, its rhythmic clatter a familiar sound carrying them away from the city and northward, toward the immense quiet of the Ural forests. Imagine yourself in that train car.
The gentle rocking motion, the warmth of the carriage contrasting with the view of the frosted landscape passing by the window.
The world outside becomes progressively simpler.
City gives way to town, town to village, and village to endless forest. After the train, they transfer to a truck, its engine a low grumble in the cold air, taking them to Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement on their route.
Vizhai was little more than a collection of simple wooden houses, nestled amongst tall pines heavy with snow.
Smoke curled from the chimneys in lazy grey ribbons,
a sign of life in the deep stillness.
The air here was different, thin, crisp, and carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth.
The group spent their final hours of civilization in the dim light of kerosene lamps, performing the last careful checks of their equipment. Their skis, their insulated boots, their canvas tent, their store of food.
Their movements would have been calm and practiced.
The quiet, focused ritual of experienced travelers.
They slept that night on simple cots, the profound silence of the wilderness just beyond the village walls. On January 27th, they began.
The only sounds were the soft, rhythmic shush of their skis gliding over fresh snow,
the whisper of their layered clothing, and the quiet puffs of their own breath turning to mist in the frigid air.
The world was a monochrome palette of white snow and dark trees.
The rhythm of their lives slowed to the pace of their journey.
Ski, rest, eat, sleep. Their recovered journals and photographs paint a picture of these early days.
We see images of smiling faces, ruddy from the cold, huddled around a small campfire. We can imagine the quiet moments at the end of each day. Melting snow for tea, the careful rationing of bread and sausage, the low murmur of conversation as they studied maps by the light of a single candle inside their tent.
They wrote of the beauty of the landscape,
of icy sunrises that painted the snowy peaks in hues of pink and gold.
It was a simple, demanding, and deeply peaceful existence.
As they pushed deeper, the terrain grew more challenging. The gentle forests gave way to the exposed highlands of the Ural Plateau. On the 31st of January, having reached the upper valley of the Ospy River, they made a practical decision. Here, in the shelter of the tree line, they would build a small cache for their excess supplies.
It was a common practice, designed to lighten their load for the final, most difficult ascent, while ensuring they had provisions for their return journey.
Imagine the scene, the methodical work of digging into the deep snow.
Laying a bed of logs, a nastal, to keep their supplies of the frozen ground.
They carefully stored extra food, boots, and other heavy gear, marking the location so they could find it again.
The air is still. The only sound is the light scraping of their shovels and the faint, distant call of a bird. It is an act of foresight.
A quiet vote of confidence in their own return. The next day, February 1st, the weather began to turn. A wind, born on the high, barren slopes of the mountain ahead, began to blow. The local Mansi people called this mountain Kholat Syakhl, which is sometimes translated as Dead Mountain, a name derived from the scarcity of game in the area.
As the hikers began their ascent, the sky grew heavy and overcast. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a thick, swirling blizzard that steadily reduced visibility. Their diaries suggest that in the low, disorienting light, they strayed from their intended path, moving a little too far to the west. Their plan had been to cross the pass and descend to a sheltered spot on the other side to make camp.
But the conditions worsened, and the light began to fail. They found themselves on an exposed, open slope, with the relative safety of the tree line over a kilometer below them. In the swirling snow, Dyatlov made a decision. They would make camp here, on the side of the mountain. Picture them in the fading light of that late afternoon,
working together as a practice team to pitch their large canvas tent in the driving wind. Their movements are efficient, born of long training. They anchor it securely into the snow, a single, small point of human endeavor against the vast, indifferent mountain. Inside, the world is reduced to the flapping canvas walls and the flickering light of a candle or a small stove.
They would have shared a simple, warm meal.
Perhaps they read, or wrote in their journals, the sounds of the wind, a constant companion outside.
In this quiet, insulated space, far from everything, they settled in for the night, unaware that it would be their last. For weeks, the mountain held its silence.
Fresh snow fell, covering the tent, covering any tracks. Then, on the morning of February 26th, a search party, dispatched when the group failed to return, finally arrived at the location.
What they found was a strange and silent scene. The tent was there, half collapsed and almost buried in snow. The official report describes it plainly. The tent was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind.
An examination revealed that the canvas had not been unfastened.
It had been sliced open from the inside.
And so, we will pause here with this quiet, perplexing image. An abandoned tent on a desolate mountainside.
The wind sighs gently over the snow.
Footprints led away from the curious opening, down the slope, before disappearing into the blank white emptiness. 9 people are gone. All that remains is the silence.
And a question hanging in the cold, thin air. In the days that followed the group's expected return date, a quiet concern began to grow. By the 20th of February, with no word from the hikers, their families officially requested a search.
The response was prompt and thorough.
Volunteer search parties, composed of students and fellow hikers, were organized.
They were soon joined by aviation units and the military, all tasked with combing the vast, silent expanse of the northern Urals.
The environment itself presented the greatest challenge. The mountain pass was gripped by severe winter weather.
Persistent winds swept snow across the slopes, creating near white-out conditions that grounded helicopters and made travel on foot a slow, laborious process. Temperatures remained punishingly low, often dropping far below -20 degrees Celsius. Imagine the search teams. Small groups of figures moving slowly through a landscape of profound white.
Each step is an effort, sinking into deep, soft snow.
There is no sound but the wind and the crunch of their own boots.
Their progress is measured, their observations careful.
In this immense, indifferent wilderness, every discovery would be hard-won. Then, on the 26th of February, a breakthrough.
A student from one of the volunteer search parties, Mikhail Sharovin, noticed something dark on a distant, snow-covered slope. Upon investigation, it was confirmed to be the Dyatlov party's tent. The tent was partially collapsed and covered in a thick layer of snow, yet its discovery only deepened the sense of unease.
Inside, the scene was one of startling order.
The team's belongings were found neatly arranged.
Boots were placed in a line near the entrance.
Warm clothing, maps, and personal effects were stacked as if ready for the next day. A flask of vodka was untouched. Even some sliced bread and a piece of sallow, or cured fat, lay on a plate, a meal interrupted, but the tent was empty, and the canvas wall facing down the slope had been deliberately cut open from the inside. From this opening, a single trail of footprints descended the hill. Investigators who arrived soon after began the slow process of tracing these impressions. They counted prints belonging to 8 or 9 individuals.
What was most peculiar was that many of the prints were made by their feet, or feet clad only in socks or a single shoe.
The trail continued in a relatively straight line for nearly a mile, heading down from the exposed slope toward the faint outline of the tree line. And then, at the edge of the forest, the tracks disappeared, covered by wind-blown snow. It was here, just inside the forest's edge, that the searchers made their next discovery. Beneath the towering ancient Siberian pine, they found the faint remains of a small campfire, and beside it, lying side by side in the snow, were the bodies of 2 of the hikers, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishkonko. Both men were dressed only in their underwear and socks. Their hands were abraded, and branches on the old pine above them were broken up to a height of several meters, suggesting one of them may have tried to climb the tree, perhaps to get a better view. But an official examination would later conclude that there were no signs of a struggle. The cause of their passing was determined to be hypothermia. In the intense, pervasive cold, their bodies had simply grown still.
Medical examiners noted this was consistent with a known phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, a final, confused response of a freezing mind that mistakes the cold for a burning heat.
In the quiet of the forest, the 2 men lay peacefully, the snow gently blanketing them. The search continued.
A few hundred meters from the pine, back up the slope in the direction of the abandoned tent, 3 more bodies were found. They were Syakhl Dyatlov, the group's leader, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Their bodies were found at separate distances along the same general line, as if they had been attempting to return to the shelter of the camp.
Dyatlov was found clutching a small birch branch, his head oriented towards the tent. Kolmogorova was found furthest up the slope, closer to the camp than any of the others.
Slobodin was found between them, a small fracture noted in his skull, though it was deemed non-fatal.
Like their companions by the fire, all 3 were inadequately dressed for the conditions, and the official cause of death for each was ruled to be hypothermia.
They too had succumbed to the overwhelming cold. Throughout these discoveries, the world of the mountain remained quiet and unmoved.
The searchers worked with a slow, somber deliberation, marking the location of each finding, carefully documenting the scene. The small, ordinary objects they found nearby a scattered handful of coins. A thermos seemed strangely out of place in the immense silence. The primary question echoed in the crisp air. Why would 9 experienced hikers abandon the shelter of their tent, without shoes or proper clothing, and flee into the deadly cold of a Siberian winter night? The lead investigator assigned to the case, a prosecutor named Lev Ivanev, began to methodically compile the known facts. Each detail seemed to contradict the last. He considered the most immediate possibilities, though each one quickly proved insufficient. The first theory was an attack by local Mansi hunters. This was a natural suspicion, given the remote location, yet the evidence did not support it. All of the group's valuables, money, cameras, and supplies, even alcohol, were left untouched in the tent. A violent robbery seemed unlikely. Furthermore, only the hikers' own footprints were found leaving the tent. There were no signs of a struggle, no tracks of anyone approaching or leaving the campsite. The second theory was a natural disaster, specifically an avalanche.
Perhaps a sudden slide of snow had buried part of the tent, inducing panic, but this, too, seemed improbable.
The tent's main support pole was still standing. The items on top of the tent were not disturbed. The slope above the campsite was not steep enough for a major avalanche, and experienced investigators found no telltale signs of a snow slab having broken away. This left the official conclusion for these first 5 individuals, a tragic accident brought on by the extreme cold.
Yet, even this explanation left troubling gaps.
It did not fully account for the initial, seemingly simultaneous flight from the tent. It did not explain why they would cut their way out, rather than simply untying the flap. And it did not explain what powerful, immediate force could have compelled them all to run from their only source of shelter.
As the short winter day drew to a close, the search teams prepared to withdraw for the night.
The known facts offered no simple narrative. The evidence was a collection of silent, disparate pieces. The stillness of the mountain settled once more. In the fading light, the mystery of the empty tent and the scattered bodies only deepened, hanging over the pass like the cold, heavy air itself. As the long winter began to release its grip on the Ural Mountains, the search for the 4 missing hikers resumed. The sun, climbing higher in the sky each day, slowly began to soften the landscape. Snow that had been meters deep, packed hard by wind and cold, started to recede. The profound silence of winter was occasionally punctuated by the soft drip of melting ice from the branches of the pines. It was a time of slow and quiet transition. The search teams returned to the pass, their work now a methodical process of probing the remaining snowdrifts in areas of interest. For weeks, their efforts yielded nothing. Then, in early May, more than 2 months after the discovery of the first 5 hikers, another search party was working in the area near the tall cedar tree. About 75 meters away from the tree, in the bed of a wooded ravine, their long metal probes struck something soft beneath 4 meters of dense, wet snow. A careful excavation began. Slowly, painstakingly, the searchers removed the heavy layers of snow. They eventually uncovered the location of the final 4 members of the expedition: Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thibos-Britnov. They were found in what appeared to be a makeshift shelter, a den dug into the snowbank of the ravine. The discovery painted a quiet picture of their final hours. Unlike the first group found, these 4 were more adequately dressed. Some wore extra layers, and a few items of clothing were later identified as belonging to their companions who had perished on the slope above. The simple, factual observation was that in their final hours, they had made a concerted effort to protect themselves from the cold. However, the subsequent medical examination of this second group brought a new set of perplexing and more serious details to the official record. While one of the hikers, Alexander Kolevatov, was found to have died from hypothermia, the other 3 presented with significant internal injuries. The official reports on these findings are noted for their detached clinical language. The body of Nikolai Thibos-Britnov showed evidence of a major cranial fracture. The examinations of Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov documented multiple fractures to their thoracic cages. What was particularly noted in the reports was the absence of any significant corresponding external wounds or bruises. The internal damage was severe, yet the skin was largely unbroken. The examining coroner wrote that the force required to create such injuries would have been immense, comparing it to the impact from a high-speed automobile collision. The report also documented the natural consequences of the bodies having remained in a thawing, wet environment for nearly 3 months. The location in the ravine, with water from the melting snow flowing through it, had led to significant post-mortem deterioration, particularly to the soft tissues. This was considered a natural result of exposure to water and local fauna over a long period. As the forensic investigation continued, other unusual details were added to the growing case file. Tests conducted on some of the hikers' clothing detected the presence of low-level radioactivity. The source of this contamination was never determined, and it was simply noted as another unexplained variable. Furthermore, the investigators' file also included anecdotal reports from other people in the wider region, including geologists and members of the military. These were accounts of strange glowing orange spheres being observed in the sky to the north around the time the hikers were believed to have perished. These witness statements were officially recorded, but they existed outside the physical evidence found on the mountain slope, becoming just another layer in a case with no clear narrative. Faced with this collection of contradictory and incomplete evidence, the official investigation came to a quiet end. In May of 1959, the case was formally closed. The final report concluded that the hikers had died as a result of an unknown compelling force. This ambiguous phrase was a tacit admission that a simple, rational explanation could not be found. The files were sealed, and public access to the area was restricted for several years. The spring thaw had revealed the final members of the last expedition, but it had offered no clarity. It had only deepened the mystery, leaving behind a collection of silent facts that refused to align into a coherent story. As our quiet journey through the history of the Dyatlov Pass incident draws to a close, we do not arrive at a destination of clear answers. Instead, we find ourselves in a place of reflection, looking back at the decades of questions and the many attempts to assemble the known facts into a coherent narrative. The events of 1959 left behind not a solution, but a legacy of inquiry. Over the years, the official case file was archived, but the story itself was not forgotten. It was kept alive in articles, books, and documentaries, each attempting to shed new light on the perplexing evidence. In 2019, 60 years after the event, Russian authorities officially reopened the investigation.
Their focus was narrow, aiming to bring a definitive conclusion by examining only the most plausible natural phenomena.
After extensive analysis and modeling, this new investigation concluded that the most likely cause of the initial event was a small, delayed slab avalanche.
The theory posits that the hikers, having cut into the snowpack to pitch their tent, may have destabilized a layer of snow above them.
Hours later, this slab could have slid down, not with the force of a massive avalanche, but with enough weight and pressure to cause the tent to collapse and inflict the severe internal injuries without leaving significant external signs.
The sudden, terrifying event in the dark, they concluded, would explain the immediate flight from the tent.
This explanation provided a plausible sequence of events for many of the facts.
However, it did not satisfy all observers. Lingering questions remained. Some experts pointed to the lack of classic avalanche debris at the site, the relatively gentle slope,
and the fact that the footprints leading away from the tent appeared orderly, not indicative of a panicked, chaotic escape. And so, other theories, born from the gaps in the official narratives, have persisted. One prominent line of inquiry has focused on secret military activity in the region. It is known that the Ural Mountains were used for various tests during this period of the Cold War. This hypothesis suggests the hikers may have accidentally witnessed a weapons test, perhaps of a concussion-based or fuel-air explosive, which can produce immense pressure waves. Such an event could potentially explain the severe internal traumas. This, however, remains speculation, as no official records of such tests in that specific area and on that night have ever been declassified.
Another theory looks to a rare natural phenomenon.
It has been proposed that the unique topography of Kholat Syakhl, combined with strong winds, could have created something called infrasound.
This is a very low-frequency sound, below the threshold of human hearing, which some scientific studies suggest can induce feelings of inexplicable dread, anxiety, and panic. This hypothesis attempts to explain the seemingly irrational decision to flee the safety of the tent.
Like the military theory, it is an intriguing possibility that is difficult to either prove or disprove.
The absence of a single, universally accepted explanation has also allowed more speculative ideas to take root in popular culture.
These stories involve encounters with unknown creatures or extraterrestrial phenomena, drawing on the reports of strange orange lights.
While these narratives speak to the human imagination, they exist outside the realm of the physical evidence gathered from the mountain and remain a part of the folklore surrounding the event.
Today, memorials stand in Yekaterinburg and near the pass itself, quiet stone markers honoring the 9 lives that were lost.
They serve as somber, physical reminders of a journey that ended in mystery.
The Dyatlov Pass incident endures not as a ghost story, but as a complex historical case where the evidence is both abundant and deeply contradictory. And the truth remains just out of reach, buried under the weight of time and snow. We have followed their path tonight,
from the determined optimism of their departure
to the quiet, methodical rhythm of their journey into the wilderness.
We have stood beside the investigators, sifting through the silent clues.
The abandoned tent, the footprints in the snow, the perplexing collection of facts that tell an incomplete story. The wind that once blew across the slopes of Kholat Syakhl is silent now. It has been replaced by the stillness of your own room. The deep, biting cold of that Siberian winter night is just a distant echo.
Far from the comfort and the warmth where you now rest.
The purpose of our journey tonight was not to solve this enduring mystery. It was simply to trace its outline,
to listen to its quiet, perplexing story.
And now, it is time to let those questions go. Let the images of the snow-covered mountain, the flickering candlelight in the tent,
and the unanswered details all begin to soften and fade. There is no need to search for answers now.
The story is over.
Let the questions dissolve into the quiet of the night, like faint tracks being covered by a fresh fall of snow.
Let your mind become as clear and as still as that vast winter landscape.
All that is left to do
is rest.
Allow your breath to be slow and steady. Allow your body to feel heavy and peaceful.
And allow yourself to drift away into a deep
and untroubled sleep.
Rest well.